Okay, hello everyone. We're very happy to have Nathalie Cossa of the Leicestershire and Rutland Bat Group with us this evening, and she's going to give us a brief introduction about bats. It says very brief. I don't know how we'll be the judge of whether it's very brief or not. But thank you very much for joining us this evening, Nathalie, and over to you to tell us all about bats in Leicestershire and Rutland.
Great, well, thank you very much for having me. I'm more than happy to try and enthuse people to the world of bats. So welcome, yes, my name's Nathalie. I'm part of the Leicestershire and Rutland Bat Group, and yes, I'm going to do an introduction to bats, but there's so much to learn about bats and there's so much still to learn that that's why I've termed it a brief introduction to bats. Right, let's all hope this all works. I haven't done a Zoom talk before. Let's hope it works. Okay, right, yes. So bats have been around on Earth for a long time. This is a fossil from Wyoming from 52 million years ago. If you have a look at it, so its bone structure, there's not that much that's changed with bats that you find now. There are over 1,400 species of bat worldwide, and there are still more being discovered. And they make up 20% of all mammal species worldwide. And bats are the only true flying mammals. So in terms of bats of the world, they come in all shapes and sizes and colours and different types of faces and big eyes, small eyes, big round noses, they come in all shapes. And they've evolved over millions of years to sort of fit different ecological niches. Some can be as large as a small dog, or some as small as a bee. Some come with a 2-metre wingspan and weigh 1.5 kilos, whereas some, like the bumblebee bat, weighs only 2 grams. And in terms of animal species, they can get very old in relation to their body size, with some species reaching over 30 years old. So in terms of Britain has 18 species of bats, 17 of which are known to be breeding here. The 18th species, the greater mouse-eared bat, which is known to hibernate in the tunnels down in Sussex. I'm not sure if it was recorded last winter, but because it's only ever been recorded in the winter, it's not considered a breeding bat. We've got 13 different species in Leicestershire and Rutland, which is really good. Bats make up a third of our terrestrial animal species in the UK, and all British bats are insectivorous, so they only eat insects, nothing else. And due to declines in bat numbers over many years, all British bats are legally protected, and it is offence to harm a bat, destroy a bat roost, or obstruct access to a bat roost, even if the bat is not present. So in the past, bats have sort of had bad press, you know, from vampire films and the myth of getting tangled in people's hair and appearing in horror films and sort of Halloween and spooky things like that. But unfortunately, with everything going on now, the negativity around bats is actually due to the fact that they're carrying disease which can cause pandemics. So yes, so this is the next big thing, you know, what we're all worried about, and the possibility of bats passing on disease. And so there's a lot of work being carried out around the world to try and make people realise you know, that bats aren't the problem, it's people, as always. But bats are brilliant, and they do matter. Bats are indicators of biodiversity. They use a wide range of habitats, such as wetlands, woodlands, farmlands, and urban areas. And they're the top predators of common nocturnal insects, which are very sensitive to changes in land use. So landscape change, such as agricultural intensification, development, and habitat fragmentation, which affects the bats, will also affect many other wildlife species. So if people can see that there's a change in bat numbers in the decline, then they also indicate then that it's probably affecting other species in a negative way. There are over, this is a bit easy today. Bats are also pollinators, and as I said, not in the UK, but in other countries of the world. And over 500 plants rely on bats to pollinate their flowers, such as some species of mango, banana, guava, and agave. So if you like your tequila or your agave syrup, then you've got bats to thank for that. Bats are really good pest controllers too. They eat thousands of insects a night. Now I know there's a moth in this picture, and we consider that a pest, but that was just a good bat and insect photograph. But they'll like what the pipistrelle will eat up to 3,000 midges and mosquitoes a night, And in some countries, they actively encourage bats on their land because they'll eat all the insects which are causing problems on their crops, which means then the farmers don't have to use as many pesticides. And bats are also really good seed dispersers and reforesters. So like birds, they play a critical role in spreading the seeds of trees and other plants. So some tropical fruit bats, they'll carry the seed inside them as they digest the fruit, and then they excrete the seeds far away from the original tree. So these seeds drop to the ground in their own ready-made fertilizer, which helps them germinate and grow. And because bats help pollinate and disperse seeds, they can play an important part in helping the regrowth after forest clearance. So how do bats get around in the dark? So bats aren't blind, but they hunt insects in flight in the dark using sound called echolocation. They emit a frequency which then bounces off an object, and in their brains at the same time as flying, they can create a picture in their mind. So I'll just try and play some of these sounds. So yep, again. Okay, so that was a common pipistrelle. Oh, I've gone again. No. Right, this is a noctule. Yeah, so did you hear that one, the noctule?
Yes, we could hear those two.
Great, so that's a very different noise. So that one was sort of a much more of a sort of chip chop call. And so what we do then is with the echolocation is we go out on out and about, and we have our bat detectors with us, and we listen to see what bats are out there. All right, so and what we use nowadays as well, with sort of as the bat detectors become more and more advanced, we can actually record the bat calls as we're out and about, and record the GPS of where we were as well. So the two images you can see at the bottom are sonograms, and so they have the frequency running along the vertical axes and time along the horizontal axes. So this first one here, there are two species of bats. So if you can see this sort of hockey stick shaped calls here, echolocating at around 55 kilohertz, and this belongs to soprano pipistrelle. This is what they echolocate, and this is the shape of their call. The ones down here between 18 and 20 kilohertz are noctule. So they sort of tend to go down and up, down and up, down and up, which represents a sort of chip chop, chip chop, chip chop call. And then the one here on the right, these straight vertical calls, these belong to the myotis species. So the myotis species, they're very hard to tell apart using just sonograms. The Daubenton's do a different call, a different social call, which is when it's there, then you can identify it as Daubenton's. Or if you were out and about and you were actually recording and watching the bat at the same time and watching how it was feeding. So say, for example, if it was feeding by flying close to the surface of water, then again, you're very likely to be seeing Daubenton's. But if you're just out and about in a wood, it's usually impossible to split them apart, and it's just not worth the effort, really. So this is what most people use now as sonograms. To identify the species. But as well as that, it's still really important to ideally see them, see how they're feeding, seeing what time they come out at night, just sort of seeing how they're flying and where they're flying. It's where they roost, and this is especially important if it's a maternity roost, because the females won't want to spend too much energy going far away. So usually around where there's good habitats, so say for example wet woodland, old wet woodland, where there are basically lots of insects, that's where the maternity roost will be. And then the males will be in roosts, either individually or together, further away from the good foraging habitat. Bats will feed over water, woodlands and open grasslands, and urban gardens can provide really good foraging for bats, especially if you have night flowering plants such as night scented stock and things like that, and sort of white flowers, basically flowers which attract nocturnal insects. Ponds are really good as well because you always have sort of larvae in those that sort of catch midges and mosquitoes and things like that. And they use linear features to navigate. So for example, this picture along the top here, you can see all these lovely hedgerows. So they'll use hedgerows, canals, roadsides, rivers, dry stone walls, all sorts of different edges of woodlands like that to navigate. And because they're long lived, they'll have, you know, good memory of maps of where the good roosts are, or the different roosts depending on which time of year, where the different feeding areas are, where the different feeding areas are at which times of the year. So for example, nocturals will know which fields are really good for cockchafers in May, and then in the autumn they'll feed somewhere else and predate on other sort of, you know, bigger insects. They found fairly recently that barbastels, which is a rare bat in the UK, we have it in Leicestershire and Rutland. They like foraging in woodland, and they've got a set route that they do, a set route, and then they sort of split off into a woodland. And they found that the female barbastels have all got territories within that woodland, and they don't sort of impede on each other's territory. And this has been really important research, because, you know, if you're doing work to a woodland and a road's going nearby or something, and you sort of cut a third of the woodland down, you know you've got bats there, you think, oh, well, it's okay, they've still got the rest of the woodland. But actually, in terms of the barbastels, if it was the territories of, you know, barbastel A and B that's been destroyed, then they've lost that territory and they've got nowhere then to feed. So yeah, so there's more and more being found out about barbastels, well, and bats in general, because of tagging and DNA analysis and things like that. So the dog's just come in to see me. Right, so where do bats?
We've lost your sound again, Natalie.
So bat rodents, chew and gnaw. Oh, again. Oh no.
Could you start this slide again?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So where do bats roost? So bats aren't rodents, so they don't chew and cause issues in that way. And they're not like birds, even though they fly, so they don't make nests. So actually, bats in a home are good to have, because they don't cause too many problems. They like roosting in sort of buildings, so you can see where all these red dots are. You know, bats are tiny, they like roosting everywhere, sort of under lead flashing, in cavity walls, between tiles and a membrane, in soffits, yeah, hanging tiles, any kind of cladding, all sorts of spaces. And bats, because, you know, we're sort of encroaching more and more into their land, and we're sort of changing the land around us, bats are increasingly choosing to roost with us in our homes. And they have different roosts at different times of the year, depending on sort of what they're doing. So, for example, the females, if they want a maternity roost, they like it to be very nice and warm. So if they're in a big old, you know, Victorian house with a big loft space, the females will tend to give birth on the sort of south-facing side where it's nice and warm, keep their pups nice and warm, and it'll help their young develop faster. Whereas in terms of hibernation, they'll want to go in sort of more north-facing side where it's cooler. Okay, so what do bats do throughout the year? So in spring, so what's just been happening now is bats have been coming out of hibernation at March, April time, and they've been eating like mad. So this warmer weather's, well, before a few weeks ago, has been ideal. They've just been going out just feeding as much as they can. And females have been moving to the maternity roosts. So again, this will be a roost that they'll know of, that they'll use every year to give birth. So at the moment, now we're the beginning of June, so at the moment the young are being born. The young are called pups, and bats in our country tend to give birth to just one pup. In sort of southern Europe, they'll often give birth to two pups because there's more food around, probably, but here they tend to just give birth to one pup. And it's the equivalent of 20 to 30% of the mother's weight. So in human terms, that's a woman giving birth to a 4-year-old, which is pretty impressive. And the young are born naked and blind, since they're mammals, and they're fed on milk. And the females can carry the young bat with her. So if there's a problem with the roost, or they get nervous, or some species tend to like moving around every few days, the pup will just cling on to her tummy and she'll fly off with it. Young bats can fly to around 3 weeks old, and then they're independent and sort of flying and catching insects for themselves at 6 weeks. So this is the time that Bat Group gets very busy, and the Bat Helpline at the Bat Conservation Trust, because this is when often sort of pups get found because they've fallen off their mums, or there have been issues with the roost, or when the young bats start to fly, they sort of get lost, and instead of going into the small hole that leads to their roost in the roof, say for example, they'll just fly in through the open window that's open because it's a nice summer's evening, and then they end up in somebody's house. So that's when it gets very busy. So people call the helpline, which in turn then activates all the volunteers around Leicestershire and Rutlands that help go and collect the young, feed them up, and give them any medicine if required, and just sort of help re-release them. In the autumn, this is when bats mate and find their winter roosts, and they're basically just feeding again like mad to put on enough fat reserves for hibernation. So bats are a bit like badgers in terms that they mate in the autumn, and some mate throughout the winter and the spring, but they tend to mate predominantly in the autumn. But they'll delay fertilization until the spring, until they come out of hibernation, it's warm enough and they know there's enough food. So that's what they do in the autumn. And in the winter they hibernate because there are few insects around. It's not worth their energy in flying around, so they'll hibernate. They'll hibernate in tunnels, disused railway tunnels, caves, cellars, trees, bat boxes, sort of very cold areas of houses. But it's got to be damp. It's got to have a high percentage of humidity so their wing membranes don't dry out. And it's got to be quiet as well. They don't like noise, and they don't like drafts as well. So sort of the bats in the belfry is a misconception. They're quite drafty and light in the church towers. They don't actually like the belfry bit of it that much. Okay, why are bats endangered? So the numbers have fallen dramatically in the last few decades. A lot of it's due to loss of roost sites. So in this case here, there's a person who's sort of doing timber treatment works. And I'd like to think that people are getting more knowledgeable with how to look for bats and to stop work if they do find evidence of bats. I know we do get some calls from sort of rent-to-kill companies who have found evidence of bats, and so they'd like some advice, you know, before they go in to remove wasps' nests and things like that. And the problem with sort of wood treatment is that you know, bats are very clean animals. They like grooming a lot, and the chemicals can last in the wood for a long time. So as they're grooming themselves, they can sort of just then ingest the chemicals, which then kills them. A big one is loss of suitable feeding habitat and the fragmentation of roosts and feeding sites. So you can see this field here on the right-hand side. You know, there's the odd isolated trees. Probably they used to be in former hedgerows. So the hedgerows have gone, the linear features have gone, and so it's difficult for them to know. You know, they basically just can't navigate anywhere. Changes to housing. A lot of houses are made sort of super airtight nowadays, with plastic soffits, and yeah, just makes it harder for them to find places to roost in homes. Health and safety as well on trees. 3/4 of British bat species use trees, and there's sort of been, you know, as soon as sort of trees starting to look a bit ill or a bit ropey, it's far cheaper just to fell the tree from the base rather than employ climbers to climb up and to carefully lower limbs and to do the surveys. I should also say about in terms of the loss of suitable feeding habitat, is sort of a much increased use of pesticides and agricultural intensification, which means that there aren't as many insects around. We're hearing about the huge dramatic change in insect numbers, which of course then affects bats, birds and all sorts of species, as well as the insects themselves. Flies and cats. So it's not flies themselves that cause the problems because bats eat flies, but if people have the sort of the cluster fly problems with their homes, I don't know if anyone here has had the cluster fly issues, but it's probably around soon this time of year where just hundreds and hundreds of flies just seem to appear. They just hatch out of of the buildings, and people then put up these sticky tapes. People put sticky tapes up in their sort of greenhouses as well to catch greenfly and things like that. Those sort of yellow rectangles. I must admit I did as well years ago, to catch aphids and things off my to get them off my plants, my vegetables. But unfortunately, yeah, bats will just stick to them and can't get off, and then they'll die if they're not helped. So yeah, lots of bats will be found stuck on those, and quite popular as well is to get these sticky mats to catch rodents. So it's not the snap traps; it's just these like mats of tar or something. Where so this poor mouse or whatever will just stick in it and then just die a slow death. And it's the same for bats as well. So please don't use those if you can help it. We'll put a cage over it or something. And cats as well. So at least 30% of, I think it's higher than 30% to be honest, of calls that we get of injured bats.
Your sound.
Injuries come to bats come in. Oh, hello.
We lost you just for a minute there. So just what you were telling us about cats.
Oh yes, they're evil. Can you hear me now? Okay, good. Yeah, so yes, cats cause a major problem with injuries of bats. You know, they're very curious animals. If they find the roost, they'll just sort of sit by the roost and sort of swat them as they come out. There's also with, say for example, brown long-eared, because they catch insects off vegetation, they do tend to fly really low down, and cats can easily just jump up and sort of catch them that way. Okay, so just quickly, sorry, I'm aware of the time. There's so much to talk about. So these are the records for Leicestershire and Rutland. These are the ones I got from Leicestershire County Council. So thank you to those. So you can see the red dots basically represent every single bat record that we've got. So they're pretty well clustered. So you've got Leicester City Centre here, Melton, Oakham, Rutland Water, Market Harborough, Loughborough, Ashby. So they're sort of often centred around villages and towns, because that's where we get either injured bats, you know, the calls, grounded bats calling us, or for development. But we could really do with some recording out sort of more in the countryside, in the fields here. That would be lovely. So yes, sorry, so common pipistrelle, our most common species. They tend to be the ones people see in their back garden, and they'll feed on midges and mosquitoes, things like that. We'll often see them in urban areas because they're very, they're not as fussy a bat as any of the others. They don't mind street lighting as much. They'll basically feed in most types of habitats. Checking the sound. Soprano pipistrelle, more ginger and fur and pink around the face. You can see the eye really clearly. Similar habitats to common pipistrelle, although they prefer sort of more wetland habitats. So you can see through the city, they seem to follow the River Soar along there. And they get, again, eat little insects, which is mosquitoes. Brown long-eared bats, so these are spread throughout the Leicestershire and Rutland. They're all over the place. Again, they're one of the more common bats we're likely to see here. So as I said, they'll pick insects off vegetation, and then they'll use perches, so beams in the open barns, things like that, or branches to sit on and to eat the insects. So if you're ever anywhere and you find a little pile of butterfly or moth wings, orange underwing or sort of peacock wings, things like that, and you look up and there's sort of a beam of some kind, then you found a brown long-eared feeding roost. Nocturnal, so these are nice big chunky bats, one of our largest species, very ginger, very sleek fur. Yeah, they're lovely, they're really docile, really nice bat to handle when it's in a bat box. First to appear in the evening, very powerful flyers. They'll fly, you know, a good few kilometres to different feeding sites. And they'll eat small insects and eat beetles, moths, cockchafers, all sorts. You know, they do eat some pretty big insects. They prefer roosting in trees. So liselers are slightly smaller than nocturals. They've got what you call this mane here on the back. Sort of, it's not as obvious here, but when you're holding them, they sort of have a bit of a mane. And when you blow on the fur, it's a two-tone colour. So it tends to be gingery along the top, but it's like dark at the base. So again, that helps us to identify that it's a liselers. They as well fly high and fast and out in the open. They're a forest species, really like roosting in tree holes, but also in houses. They tend to move every few days from their roost sites. So you can see from the map, they're not that common a species in this county. Myotis species, so we've got 4 here. We've got Daubenton's, Natteras, Whiskered and Brants. I've just lumped them all together because, yeah, there's Myotis. And again, you know, we've got quite spread out throughout the county. They tend to emerge when it's nice and dark, an hour after sunset, sort of medium-sized. Okay, so what can you do, you might ask? So if you're planning any building work and you think there might be bats, just have a look around, see if you can find any evidence of bats. If you find droppings, they look very similar to mice or rat droppings, depending on the size of the bats. So you just pick one up and you roll it between your thumb and your finger. And if it stays hard, it's a rodent, so a mouse or a rat. But if it crumbles, it's a bat. Yeah, if you've got mice or fly problems, you know, do you really need to put down poison or sticky fly traps, or, you know, the smoke gas bombs that people just throw up in the loft and close the hatch and it just kills everything. Bats. Think about other ways you can control those. If you own a cat, bring the cat in for the night, half an hour before sunset, which is especially important basically from now on until the end of August. This will really help nesting birds as well. Feel free to put up a bat box on the south-facing wall away from cats and exterior lights. There's plenty of information on the internet of how to, you know, types to get and where to put them. And garden for bats too, and it will help other wildlife. So put in ponds, leave long grass, grow lots of different plants, shrubs, trees, climbers, single flowers ideally, because then get more insects that can come to get the pollen, which then feed the bats. And if you've got security lights, get ones with sensors, motion sensors, so that they're not on all night. And just wait to encourage natural predators like ladybirds. Feel free to join the bat group, that would be great. It's only £7.50, so it's a bargain. Unfortunately, we can't run any activities at the moment because everything going on. But saying that is we're still getting calls for injured bats. And so we still need money to help with vets bills, for antibiotics, for mealworms and food. So we've got a really good band of volunteers that are either ambulance drivers that help go and collect the bats and take them to carers, or ambulance drivers that are carers themselves, look after bats. We do bat walks and talks. We do some trapping sometimes at Rutland Water and elsewhere. We were hoping to this year. We do tree surveys, we do talks in churches, we do displays at various events, and we do surveys for National Bat Monitoring Project. So please join the bat group. Yeah, unfortunately, it's yeah, the events are a bit short this year, but we still really need funds to help carry on our bat work. Yay, and that's it. Sorry about that. Thank you. Any questions? I'll unshare.
Thank you very much, Nathalie. Yeah, very good. Thanks for that. An excellent talk. Can I suggest, if people want to ask a question in the chat window, you can put, there's a tool where you can put your hand up, and I'll try and take people in order that their hands go up. So if anyone's got any questions for Nathalie. While we're waiting for people to find out where the put your hand up tool is, can I just ask about bat detectors? Could
yeah,
you
sure.
say something about a range? So I don't know what the cheapest ones are. I mean, I don't know if the cheapest ones are actually worth buying. I suspect not many people will want to spend £1,400 on a bat detector. So what would you recommend?
Why not? They should do. No, what I recommend, unfortunately I've left, I haven't got one of the cheaper ones, if I'm honest. But one that is popular is a magenta bat detector. Magenta 5 is the latest one. They're usually around £80, and they're the cheapest ones you can get. And actually, they've got a really good range, and they're a really good bat detector if you just want to hear bats walking around. If you want to definitely know what the species is, then that's when you either need to get really good at using the bat detector. It's, you know, depends on what you want to use it for. The more you oh, I'm gone unstable again. Am I still?
Yeah, no, we lost a little bit after.
Okay.
We got the magenta 5. I've just put a link to that in the chat window if anyone's interested in that one. So can you carry on from magenta 5?
So usually, yeah, the magenta 5 is good as a sort of introduction one if you don't want to do definite recording of bats. But if you want to get, you know, almost 100% of the species that you've got, because you want to actually contribute to a recording system, unless you get really good at bat identification from using a bat detector, which is doable. I mean, you know, lots of people do. Then that's when you have to go for the more expensive ones that record the bats as well, so you can have a look at the sonogram at the same time. But we do, the bat group, I've got organised this year as well. We have something called a passive bat detector, which we've lent around various local groups, natural history groups, and I'd set it all up for this summer, spring, summer, autumn, to go out. But of course, we haven't been able to take it out and sort of share it between people this year. But we have got a bat detector that groups can borrow, that they put out in their garden or, you know, local areas that they think are safe, and it records bats overnight. And then either myself or volunteers who've trained up to look at sonograms go through them and let them know what bat species were there.
Just finishing off on bat detectors before we move on. What about the ones that you plug into a phone? Are they any good, or would you avoid them?
No, they are good. A lot of people use them. The Echometer Touch. Yeah, they're pretty good. I wouldn't trust the auto identification. That's rubbish. But it is a really nice way, because it does. It's probably the cheapest one you can get that records the sonograms and the location you're at, and can give you a bit of an idea of what the species is. So yeah, the Echometer Touch works on an Android, or you can get an iPhone version, and it's good. Just don't forget to stop looking at the screen and actually look at the bats while you're out and about, so you can see how it's flying and see where it's eating.
But if it's giving you a sonogram, presumably then that could be emailed to somebody for checking, or it could be submitted as evidence of a record.
Yeah, I think that's what Ben's put up recently on NatureSpot, is asking people to send sonograms, and that's normally what I tend to do. Is if people put records for bats, is I'll ask how experienced they are, and as well if they've ideally got the sonograms, to send them to me, and then I can just verify them. So the sonograms is the way of 100% getting what species it is, or genus level.
We've got multiple Margarets this evening. So one of the many Margarets, and I don't know which one it is.
Hockey Margaret.
asked about checking. Oh, it's that Margaret. Okay. Asked about checking maternity roost, and whether the bat group will be able to do any checking this year. When you said the events, did you mean just with the lifting of lockdown restrictions? Presumably 6 of you could go out now and go around in the evenings, as long as you stay 2 meters apart. But you won't presumably be running any public events this year.
No. Sorry, I was just seeing what the other messages are. To be honest, I don't check bat boxes this time of year. Well, it depends on the bat box. The ones that have got lids on the top, or the faces that come out, I don't check them this time of year, because I don't want to cause disturbance to the bats. No. This is a really important time of year, and yeah, it'd be yeah.
What about activity in the maternity roosts?
Well, activity and maternity roost, we do at Charnwood Lodge, there's a maternity roost of naturals, and we do in July, I think, June or July, Margaret probably, June, she's nodding, 2 roost counts there. So as long as we stay outside and nice and quietly without the torches on, then we do counts every year. But in terms of actually going into the loft space, that we wouldn't do that. I do have some other bat boxes that I've got up, the volunteer made, called the Kent design, which are bits of wood that are vertical, and which you can just shine a torch and just have a quick look, see if bats using them. And I've been trying to check those every month, just to sort of get an idea of what species are using them, and how long it's taking them to find the boxes, and whether there's a preference for, you know, inside the woodland or on the woodland edge and things like that. So that I've been checking on my own every month, but I'm hoping to open that up. But to be honest, there's not, when I check bat boxes, I don't tend to like causing much disturbance, so it's really a quick, you know, peek in, not that's it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We've had a question about sonograms, and then maybe Sue after that. So is there you know, is there a good place to look for sonograms online so people can see the different patterns?
Yes, if you just Google sonograms, there's lots of images that come up from different places. As well, if you
has the Bat group got any on their website? Or?
I don't think we do, actually. It's one of the we need new committee members because yeah, there's so much to do, and but this is an ongoing problem with all natural history groups. That's why everyone's laughing. Okay. Yes, yeah, I need to put some on there. Yes, but there aren't any at the moment. But yeah, I can put some on there. It's not a problem.
Sue, you've got a question?
It was a question and an observation, really. The first thing is, in response to Margaret's query about bat surveys, the professional bat consultants are still doing emergent surveys and have done so all the way through the COVID crisis. So it's not really stopped that sort of really important bat work going on.
Yeah, they've been allowed to, because it's been seen as essential, because it's part of development.
Yes.
Whereas on the nature reserves, it's more just for information. So we haven't been able to justify that as essential.
Yeah, but at least the that sort of side of bat protection's gone on. They haven't been able to do inspections inside houses, where you sort of going into people's personal living space. But we found a way around it, and it's sort of worked all right. And the question I got, though, it was really nice to hear about the horseshoe bat, Natalie. Kirsty sent me the Bat Group's tweet earlier, which is fantastic. Is it Cloudwood?
Cloudwood, yes. They're breeding on the hill, yeah.
Yeah, wonderful news. So this is one of the first records, isn't it, for the Leicestershire and Rutland for greater horseshoe bats. I just wondered if there was any evidence that climate change was encouraging them to move further north, really.
Yeah, I mean, we'd had records of a greater horseshoe hibernating at Holwell, sort of late 1990s, early 2000s. It was, and then it just hasn't been recorded, I think, since 2002. And I think there was one recorded hibernating in a tunnel near Ashby, again in the early 2000s. And I think, yeah, I think climate change is possibly helping. But also, I was told when I put that on, when I posted it after I got it confirmed, that apparently male greater horseshoes are known to travel up to sort of 100 kilometres exploring. So they're sort of termed vagrant males exploring. And so a lot of people thought it was probably just a vagrant male. But I don't know, the fact that I recorded it over 4 different nights, I mean, it records, it has to be within 10 metres of the bat detector to pick it up. So I was pretty lucky in the whole of Cloudwood in 2 different locations to pick it up. So I keep hoping there's a secret horseshoe roost somewhere near Cloudwood, which would be quite interesting with HS2 going within 100 metres of it. But yeah, we'll see what happens. But yeah, it was a very good, I must admit, when I saw it come up on the sonogram, I sort of saw it and I thought, no, that can't be a horseshoe. So I started going through my various bat sonogram books, even the one where it has sonograms for various insects and toads and birds. And it didn't look anything like it. And I I thought, oh no, this is a horseshoe, but I had to have it confirmed by somebody else. And yeah, so when it got confirmed at about 10:30, 11 at night by John Russ, leading bat expert, I was sort of shouting and jumping around the house. So yeah, it was yeah, really exciting.
I've had my hair parted by greater horseshoe bats. As you may be able to tell from the video, it was some years ago. In Buckfastleigh in South Devon, there are two big greater horseshoe roosts, and there is a place you can stand where they fly, and they will sort of fly right at you and then just miss the top of your head. It's quite an experience, I can say. Helen, you've got a couple of questions. Do you want to ask your question? Do you want to put your microphone on and ask your questions?
Okay, can you hear me? Hello?
We could hear you, but you've muted yourself again. Oh, are you holding the space bar? Is that, yeah.
Okay, is that
now
okay?
We can hear you.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Natalie, first of all, thanks very much. It's been great. Technology is something that we're all getting used to. So I think you've done a great job tonight. One of the things that I wanted to ask you was that a few years ago, I downloaded a bat app, and I've been using it for a while now. And with technology improving, I just wondered if there was any other apps that you can particularly recommend, because I found it quite useful to listen to the echo sounds on the app and then try and distinguish them when I'm you know, using my bat detector. So if you've got any sort of ideas or information about the best ones out there.
Sorry, Helen, I got kicked off, so I've only just joined back in. So sorry about that. Were you asking about bat detectors?
Yes, that's right. It was bat detectors, and it was about bat apps. I downloaded a bat app a few years ago now, and I found it really useful to listen to the recordings of bats, and then to try and actually identify them on the bat detector. And I just wondered if there was any particular one that you might recommend that's better than others.
I know Bat Conservation Trust, they do like an information leaflet for each species, and on that you can there's a sound file, which is where I got mine from, and you can hear the calls that the bat would make using a heterodyne bat detector, so the magenta or the sort of bat box 3.
Yeah.
You know, the sort of entry level bat detectors, you can hear it on that. But yeah, if you Google, and there's so much stuff on the internet nowadays, and databases.
Okay.
Yeah, they did have, because they were doing a survey I think called iBat, but that sort of hasn't been maintained. So yeah, it's sort of fallen by the wayside.
Okay, no, that's good. It's just that sometimes when people talk about chip pans and chip chops, then, you know, what is one person's chip chop, you know, might not be somebody else's. So
Yeah.
So I'm quite, you know, I quite prefer to sort of listen to it and think, oh yeah, that's it.
Yeah. You can also, from various sort of natural history shops, you can buy a CD, which is what I got when I started out, and it's I can't remember the name of the CD, but that has all the different calls on there, so you can listen to them again and again, and sort of practice, you know, what you're hearing. And yeah.
Okay.
Again, it's a mixture of what you're listening to, getting used to adjusting the frequency fast enough while the bat's still there, whilst watching the bat and seeing how it's flying and where it's flying. So it's sort of a bit of a juggling act, but it's doable. I mean, it sounds daunting, but it's you know, that is from coming out on bat walks. That's probably, you know, it's very helpful.
No,
this is very useful as well. The FSC chart.
Yeah.
It's really good because on the back it tells you the peak frequencies for each species. It gives you an information on the flight pattern, and lots of information. So for something that costs about £3, the FSC guide's really good too.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you.
I've been sharing some links in the chat window. So I think this one, the Bat Detective, is that the one that comes with the CD?
Oh yeah, that's it. Bat Detective. Yeah.
Bat Detective is the one you would recommend.
Yeah. And then you can find them on free, for free online. But yeah, the Bat Detective was really good when I started off, and it's like bird song, except we don't have hundreds of bats. You've only got 13 different bat calls to learn, so it's not too bad.
No, that's good.
Okay. Do we have any more questions?
Can I just ask
Yeah.
another one? I know that in Leicester we've got some Nathusias bats that have been recorded, and we were quite excited about that. And I went to see somebody at the marina last week, and he was excited as well. And obviously we want to encourage them, we want to conserve them. And I just wondered if you got any particular advice about what we can do, whether there's particular ways we can manage the sites, or we can encourage developers to do particular things to actually safeguard that particular species.
Yeah, it's not just Nathusias, but a lot of species use the canals and the river through Leicester. And so their requirements would all be the same, is basically to keep trees along the river and the canal up. I mean, there's been a lot of willow and all sorts of tree cutting going down, along our office. And as well as to not have all the towpaths lit.
I know.
Species
I know.
yeah, I know, it's all sorts of, singing to converted, but yeah, again, it's just keeping, or at least keeping some areas of the canal and the river dark. I mean, yeah, you can have some lights, and maybe keep, I know it might be controversial, but using the old the orange lights, not using the LEDs.
Yes, right.
Because they're finding the LEDs aren't attracting as many insects as the yellow tungsten lights, or whatever they're called. So I think, it's a mixture of keeping riparian vegetation and trees, not putting up lighting everywhere. And it'd be lovely to have buildings with green walls.
Well, yes, it would. I mean, we've got a few in Leicester, but not nearly enough. So yeah, we'll keep trying.
Yeah, keep trying.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, so we're coming up on an hour now, so I'm going to stop the recording at this point and thank Nathalie once again for an excellent talk. I'm pretty sure we've all learned something tonight, and some tips that we can all use. So thank you very much, Nathalie.
Thank you.